Hi, I'm Candace Hunter from the Practical Herbalist, and we're going to talk today about herbal vinegars. Okay, so why do I love herbal vinegars so much? I love them. I really love them. And it took me a long time to love them because honestly, vinegar is very sour. It is very sour. But there's so many different recipes that I use that do actually call for vinegar. For instance, the really obvious one, salad dressings. Most salad dressings are created with a sour, like a vinegar, and an oil. And what if you, instead of just using a vinegar, you added herbal properties to that vinegar? Suddenly you're boosting your nutrition on your vinegar side, and it's super easy to do it. I use herbal vinegars pretty much anytime a recipe calls for a vinegar. I try to reach for one that's herbal if I can, if I've got it. And honestly, I've got a wide selection. They're not hard to make. That's the best part about them, is they're just super easy to make. So we're going to talk a little bit today about how to make herbal vinegars, but also what kind of vinegars are you using? I use apple cider vinegar. I look for apple cider vinegars that are organic, raw, unfiltered, with the mother in. Organic means no chemicals were used in the processing of the vinegar or in the processing or growing of the plant. Raw means no heat has been applied to this vinegar at any point in its processing. No heat means you have live cultures. And live cultures are going to help your digestive system much better than not live cultures. A little bit of sour is good. That always helps to boost, or that often helps to boost digestive power. Sour flavor tends to trigger your bile to start moving, and it helps support your liver and gallbladder in moving your digestive juices to help you absorb whatever it is you're eating. If you add to that the live probiotics that grow vinegar, you're adding an extra piece to your microbiome that's really helpful. That's adding a lot of the good stuff to your microbiome. So you're supporting gut health, and at the same time, you're supporting immunity just by using an unfiltered raw vinegar. Mother in means the mother vinegar. So what the mother vinegar is, right? What is that? That's the mushroom that grows on top. So it's much like a kombucha. The mother of the vinegar is like a little fungal colony that grows or that will form at the top of a vinegar while you're in the process of fermenting or vinegarizing your fermentation. So if the mother's in it, it means that if you wanted to start a new batch of vinegar, like let's say you had some apple cider that had never been heated or filtered and you wanted to turn that into vinegar, you could pour in just a little bit of that mother in apple cider vinegar or any other mother in vinegar, and that'll help give it a boost to get it started faster. So it's also, the mother is just another indicator that it's raw and unfiltered. The mother can't grow in a vinegar or can't survive in a vinegar that isn't raw and unfiltered. But apple cider vinegar is just the beginning. You can reach for pretty much any of the vinegars that you love. So if you happen to be one who really loves balsamic vinegar, why not add a little bit of rosemary or a little bit of garlic to your balsamic vinegar? It tastes really good. What if you like Asian cooking and you really love rice wine vinegar? There's no reason why you can't make rice wine vinegar that has a little bit of monarda in it, or a little bit of garlic or ginger. Pull out the star anise. Oh my God, star anise and rice vinegar, really tasty. Pretty much any of the vinegars. And oh, what if you make kombucha? If you're a kombucha maker and you occasionally have that batch of kombucha that you kind of dragged your heels on, you didn't get it filtered and you didn't get it, put into bottles that fast, it got really sour. That you've had that. That's the perfect stuff to use as a vinegar. That's what I call kombucha vinegar, but it's essentially kombucha that's just vinegarized or gone too long and become too sour. That works great as a vinegar as well. So you can use any of the vinegars that you enjoy. The one vinegar I typically avoid if I'm going to be taking it internally is the white vinegar. And that's only because typically white vinegars don't have the same properties that the other types of vinegars do. They have fewer health properties, so I figure, why? But if that's what you've got, if that's what's easy for you, people have been pickling with white vinegars for quite a few decades now. They do work, and they do extract the properties from the herbs just as good as any of the other vinegars do. I usually do use, though, white vinegars if I know I'm going to use it as a topical or an external or a cleaning vinegar. So it's not like I never use white vinegar. What kind of herbs do you use? I typically look for 3 properties based on what I want to do with my vinegar. If I'm planning to use my vinegar for cooking and internal use, and it's mainly going to be like a daily use vinegar, I'm probably most often going to be looking for plants that are high in minerals and nutrition. So nettle, bottlebrush, oat straw, raspberry leaf, the plants that you can also potentially use as a long decoction because they've got so much mineral and so much nutritional value. Those are the types of herbs that you can use in vinegar to get that high mineral content. If I'm looking for vinegars that I want to use to help prevent illness, like colds and flus and seasonal crud, then I'm going to be looking for plants that are high in antimicrobial, antifungal, antibacterial types of properties. So thyme, rosemary, sage, monarda, those are all good examples of ones that have a lot of antibacterial, generally immune system boosting properties. The other piece I sometimes look for is herbs that are high in heat. So garlic, onion, horseradish, cayenne pepper, ginger. Those high heat ones also help to boost the immune system and they help to open up the system. So particularly when I'm looking at wintertime where in our climate, at least, it's very damp and it's cold, the winter creates an external climate that causes our body to want to get damp, cold, and sluggish. So those heating herbs help to open up the pores and keep the body flowing and the energies moving, which helps to prevent illness from getting locked in. So those are the 3 types of herbs I'm looking for, typically. You can do whatever you want, of course, but those are the 3 I find most useful in my life and household. Now, can you use fresh or dry? Does it matter? You can use both. When I'm looking for making vinegar with a dried herbs, I typically look for a 1-to-5 ratio. So I do approximately 1 part plant to 5 parts vinegar, like this.
Today I'm going to put together some vinegar using horsetail, dried horsetail, also known as bottlebrush or Equisetum arvens. You can see this is a super dry one. The reason I'm making it into a vinegar is because this herb has a whole lot of silica and other minerals in it. The silica is particularly helpful for growing good bones and strong teeth. I have a lot of it, so I'm just going to make a small amount. I like to keep bottlebrush vinegar on hand. I make a small amount here. I've got about a half a cup or approximately 120 milliliters. I did this by volume rather than weight today. For vinegars, I often don't do the weighing out because I don't need to. Gives you an idea. This is a pint jar, which is 500 milliliters approximately, or 16 ounces. So, I'm doing about a third. Which is good enough. You can use probably could get away with a little bit less, maybe a quarter, but that works for me. Today I'm using apple cider vinegar. So you can see how light and clear that is. It's not white, but it's a fairly light, clear looking vinegar. And all we have to do is just pour it on there. As you pour, make sure that you get everything as wet as you reasonably can. That was approximately 350 milliliters or 12 ounces of apple cider vinegar. And then we'll just cover it. I will put a plastic liner on because I forgot to grab that between the metal and the glass later. If you have a plastic lid, that's even better. And there you go. And let it stand.
So you saw how I was pretty much eyeballing how much I was going to put in of the bottle brush into that jar. It's okay with vinegars, unless you're looking at using them as a serious clinical instead of tincture type of remedy. You can kind of use the more folk method and eyeball it. That's usually what I do, and it works. If I'm using fresh plant material, though, I'm looking for a different ratio. Then I'm looking more like 1 part plant to 2 parts vinegar. So you need a lot more plant material, in part because the plants are going to be bigger, fluffier, they take up more space. They also have more water to them.
Wormwood, which is one of the Artemisia species, is really wonderful for preventing worms, but if you take it internally. But it's also really good for flea repellent and general cleansing in the house. It's good at cleaning, killing off like bacteria and that sort of thing on surfaces. It makes a really good choice for cleaning vinegars. So today I cut this wormwood and I let it stand just outside so the bugs would leave, and then also so it would wilt a little bit, so it'll let go of some of its extra water. I did that for 3 or 4 hours. You can do it, a day. 24 hours is better, but I was impatient. So today I wanted to show you how, when you're making vinegar with wormwood, and how you can use the stick blender. You can use a blender or any type of blender. Stick blender is my favorite because it's convenient if I have a good canning jar, but and less messy and easy to clean. But a regular blender works too. So you're going to take your wormwood and pull it apart. I'm leaving the stems behind because they're harder, and I don't want my blender to have to deal with that. Although some of these chunks of branch are a little bit bigger too. This works terrific with plants like wormwood that come apart easily. Sage, rosemary, a lot of the common Mediterranean herbs work great. In the spring, I often make cleaver's vinegar, and that's one place where I tend to not blend as often. Be more likely to use a food processor because the stems are on cleavers, have a tendency to become like string, and they wrap around and overheat my blender. So I have, you can see I'm using approximately, it's a half full. If I push it down, it's more like a quarter. It's not a ton. I'm not making a huge amount of this vinegar today because I have actually quite a bit, but I wanted to show you how this works. So it's about 1 3/4 cups or 14 ounces. So it's white vinegar, and you'll notice it's, clear. I use white vinegar particularly when I'm planning to do a topical or cleaning only vinegar. All right, so about half of that full. All right, and I'm going to put my blender in, and we'll just... So you can see there the amount of vinegar. The vinegar's already begun to change color because we released all those juices. My blending isn't perfect, and then I don't have absolutely perfectly fine pasted thin little pieces, but it's good enough. I'm going to let this stand, cover this and let it stand for 2 weeks at least, probably, knowing me, more like 2 to 3 months, and eventually I will strain it.
So you saw with my wormwood vinegar, I use the stick blender. You can use a bar blender or a countertop blender. You can also use a food processor. I like the stick blender a lot when I'm doing just a small batch. Now, if I'm using dried plant material, I typically aim to only use that which is like cut and sift, not powdered, or larger pieces, and I usually don't need a blender for that. The straining part for the dried is fairly easy if you do that. If you use the powdered one, it can be harder to get your vinegar to be fully strained.
Okay, we just started the bottle brush vinegar. I had one that was already going, so I'm going to show you the difference. Not all herbs have a huge amount of difference once they've been strained. See, this has been sitting for 3 months in vinegar. I poured it in here already. I just wanted to show you the difference between the one that we just did a few moments ago. And you can see how the change in color, the one that we are just straining today, which I'm going to squeeze out for you and show you, is a little bit darker in color, but there's not a huge amount of color change compared to the light one here. All right, let me set that aside. I'm using my favorite straining bag. It's the same one I use for pretty much everything else. The other thing I wanted to show you is we used the same cider vinegar for this one as I did for the one that we just started. And you'll notice there's a little bit of color change in our cider vinegar. It's a little cloudier, a little less clear than it was, but there's not a lot of green or a lot of other color change. It's a little bit changed, but not a huge amount. And there's that. The plastic lid works very nicely. You can get an idea. Not a lot of color change to the vinegar, a little cloudier for the just strained. The fresh stuff will draw in more minerals soon.
So you saw how the change in the finished herbs was different. So there's a small amount of change, but there often isn't a great deal of color change that I've noticed in the vinegar or in the plant material when I'm working with dried herbs. Now, when I'm working with fresh herbs, there's usually a lot of color change, like this.
A few months ago, in the spring, before my monarda or bee balm had started to bloom, I picked a bunch of leaves and I infused them into a vinegar. So this is the vinegar, and I wanted to show you what it looks like. They were fresh when I did it. I want to show you what it looks like when we strain out a fresh vinegar that's been finished. This one, like I said, has been sitting for, at this point, about almost 3 months. I didn't bring my rubber scraper. I could scrape that out. That little bit of plant material probably won't make a huge difference. You can see I blended the leaves, so they're fairly small. If you could smell it, you'd smell that it's got a strong monarda scent, which is similar to a combination of like oregano and thyme. And you can see how I'm squeezing. I use this straining bag out. It's a fine mesh straining bag. I got this one from the brew shop, but a jelly bag or a nut milk bag would also work. And squeeze out as much as possible. I like to keep a strainer at the bottom just in case any bits come out over the top. Sometimes when I'm straining, you can see a couple little bits have come out. My bag is kind of old too. I've been using it for quite a few years, and I wash it thoroughly in between uses, but you know, breaks down. Okay, that'll be good enough for now. And you can see how the plant material looks fairly dry there when it's been squeezed out well. So we'll set that aside. And you saw that I started with about a quart, just under a quart of material. And that was what I had done, was I filled up my quart jar about halfway with leaves, and then I topped it off with the vinegar. So now you can see the vinegar I used was an apple cider vinegar, and you can see how much green got in there. When you use fresh plant material, you're far more likely to get a lot of green than when you use not fresh plant material. There we go. Now, my little tip for you is if you're using a canning jar and you don't have a plastic lid, but you're using the metal ones, take a piece of plastic. Wax paper also works, but I like plastic because it seems like it lasts longer. Put it on, and then put your lid on to protect the metal so it doesn't degrade. Otherwise your rings and your metal lid will eventually eat away. So here you go, and let me get my monarda vinegar. There we go.
My monarda vinegar, as you saw, was much more green, and part of the reason for that, if I had done it with dried, it wouldn't have been that green. Part of the reason for that is the chlorophyll that's inherently present in fresh plant material. So I've noticed a variety, like when I do Cleaver's vinegar, it's got some green tint to it, but it's not nearly as strong a green color as that monarda vinegar was. So that's the basic how-to on how to do your herbal vinegars. Once you've made them, keep them on your shelf or in your refrigerator. If I'm making with fresh plant material, I'm far more likely to put it in the refrigerator. If you notice any molds growing on your vinegar, then stop using them. You could consider using them for cleaning at that point if you scrape or strain the mold out, but typically that's when I just compost them. For the most part, I've found that I've had vinegars that have lasted on occasion, 3 to 4 years and still been good. And More often, I make small batches so that I'm using them up regularly, and I keep them out where it's easy to find them. So put them out where they're easy to find, use them every day, use them in your cleaning, use them in your cooking, use them in your beauty and hair care, skin care. Add them to your bath, add them to your foot baths. Use vinegar every day. It's good. It's good for you.